Hi, Rob B here with Rob D, and you're listening to the Property Podcast. It's episode 187. Now, we're busy people, and we have pretty busy weeks, but it seems the property industry's been trying to outdo us this week. So this week, we're looking at a very busy week in property.
Yeah, this is a highly unusual set of circumstances. Normally, we always have one news story at the start of the show, and some weeks, the government's done something terrible to us, so we can talk about that. But most weeks, not that much has happened at all, and we're sort of trying to dig something out that's relevant. When we were doing that this week, we found 4 stories, all of which are relevant and time sensitive, and are kind of linked to each other. So we thought, well, rather than just kind of dripping them out over the next few weeks, let's make a whole episode out of it and talk about all of these stories as they relate to one another. So lots of announcements coming out to do with mortgages, to do with building targets. So we're going to talk about all of that and how it might affect you in this episode.
We will indeed. But before we do, we had a good evening. Well, I did, Rob. I don't want to speak for yourself. So actually, rather than speaking for you, we went to the meetups last night. How was it?
It was great. I went to the new Waterloo meetup. So there used to be a meetup at South Bank, but it's now moved to a far improved venue in Waterloo. And it was really, really good. It was very loud. It was very busy. I think that meetup is going to be extremely popular. I think it's going to be challenging for being our biggest now. And it was really great because a couple of guys from RMP were there running the show. Nick, our meetup leader from Bournemouth, was up. So I got to hang out with him and just meet a lot of really cool people, some extremely experienced and some just starting out. But as ever, super friendly, really fun, no pressure. It's exactly what you'd want a Property Hub meetup to be. I think it's exactly the vision that we had about a year ago now when we were starting these. So my voice is struggling a bit this morning because it was very loud, but really fun evening. How about over in Colchester?
Colchester was lovely. Never been to Colchester before. It's quite nice about the meetups. I get to go to different places I've never been to. So Colchester was great. Diana, who was running the group that evening, does a great job with Andy, who couldn't be there that evening. But it's really nice venue, actually. One of the nicest, if not the nicest. I really like Leeds venue as well, but one of the nicest venues I've been to. Very relaxed, very nice. Jazz music in the background, very sophisticated. Nice group of people. Sounds like we weren't quite as busy as yourself, Rob, but that's to be expected. And I think that's a nice contrast between some of our city location meetups and the more regional ones. That the regional ones is more conversation, maybe sit around tables and have a chat. And then the city ones are more stand up, meeting lots of people in a friendly way, not like a networky, shaking as many hands as you can way. But there's a nice contrast. So if you are lucky enough to be able to get to 2 different ones that aren't too far from you, maybe a city one and then maybe a more regional one, try it, see which type you like and go from there. I had a couple of people at the Colchester one who wanted a more relaxed setting, so they went there instead of London. I know not everyone can do that, but give it a try. The Colchester meetup I can highly recommend. Lovely venue, lovely group of people, and I had a nice time.
Excellent. Well, it's not too early to book for next month. It's always the first Thursday of the month. And so if you want to go and book your place on the next one to make sure you don't forget, propertyhub.net/meetups is the place to go. They're all listed on there. There's loads. There's bound to be at least one near you. If you're spoilt for choice and you've got several, then try them all out and meet lots of fun people and see which suits you best. But wherever you go, we are pretty sure you'll have a good time and hopefully we'll bump into you there. Now let's get cracking on with these news stories. Because as we said earlier, there's a surprising amount going on at the moment. Some of it coming out of the party conferences that are going on, but then other bits coming out of the Bank of England. It is all happening. So how about you kick us off, Rob, with this first story from Rick's saying we need another 1.8 million rental properties.
We do. But before I get going, there's going to be a lot of content and a lot of links mentioned. So you probably want to note this down. Go to the propertyhub.net/busy week. That's busy week /busy week. Go there and you'll get all these links that we're about to discuss. So, starting with, as you said, Rob, we need another 1.8 million homes to rent, not to build, to rent by 2025. So not that far away, and we need to find another 1.8 million homes. Well, it's a good job that the government's so landlord-friendly. Well, this is a report from RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, obviously a very respected organisation. And they've put together this report saying that the scale of buy-to-let properties dropped sharply when the new stamp duty surcharge was imposed on April 1st. And on top of that, 86, which I really struggle to believe, but 86% of landlords say they have no plans to increase their rental portfolio this year, which is weird because we've seemed to see the complete opposite, but maybe that's because our audience are more educated. We'll see. Now, this is great, and it's a big, big figure, but I really don't see, like with many targets set for housing, whether it's build or rent, how this number is going to be met. So I think what it highlights is that while there's a shortage, and we talk about this a lot, a shortage of properties, and we need to build more, this is the first time we're really reporting on the shortage of rent, because the way people conduct their lifestyles are different now than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's not changing overnight, but there's this shift that more people are comfortable renting. And I speak to more and more people, and I think it's, a younger generation who want that flexibility, don't know where they're going to settle yet, often will work in cities in their 20s and 30s, and then may move on to areas that are slightly more rural or further out of the cities because they start families and what have you. So renting isn't really seen anymore that by many people as you're renting. It's like, oh, you're renting. That makes sense for you and your lifestyle. So we're going to need these homes. How we're going to get them, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it certainly will. And institutional investment will undoubtedly have to form a part of that. And there are suggestions in this article from RICS that tax breaks are needed to encourage build to rent type investments. It certainly seems to be something that the government is keen on pushing that angle. But private landlords are going to be needed as well. Much as we're not popular, it's going to be a necessary part of the housing mix for certainly the foreseeable future. So rather at odds with that, it leads us on to the next story, which is from The Guardian. Landlords lose legal challenge over buy-to-let tax changes. So this is the case that you might be aware of. We've mentioned it several times, but it's a group of landlords who are trying to challenge in the High Court what they're calling Clause 24, which is part of the finance bill that says that you now can't offset your finance interest against your tax bill. And we've talked about this many, many times in the past, but the effect of it is if you're highly leveraged and you are an individual investor, your profitability suddenly goes right down because you're paying a lot more tax despite nothing having changed. So they've been trying to challenge this in the High Court. And just yesterday, as we were recording this, it got thrown out, basically. Doesn't sound like it went particularly well. The judge said it would be a miserable spectacle to watch a case that is bound to fail. So it didn't even get as far as a proper hearing. And the HMRC representative said there are cases which justify the courts looking at them in the public interest. This is not one of them. So that didn't go so well. Obviously, they're not very happy. But then I think it was always doubtful whether the government would allow itself to be taken to court and very publicly having something like this overturned, especially with an unpopular group like landlords. But good on them for trying. It's one of those things where you can see what the government's trying to do, but then it is kind of at odds with the need for more rental accommodation. When you tax something more, you get less of it. That's fairly basic. And so it's interesting when we're looking at all these stories together that some of them seem to directly contradict what others of them are saying needs to happen. So it's all a bit of a mess, but ultimately not good news there.
And this relates back to what we were saying a few weeks ago about the housing minister potentially softening his stance against landlords. So it all contradicts itself, which probably this is why we want to do the episode, because it makes it so interesting. I think the autumn statement is going to be very interesting in a few weeks' time to see what actually happens. There's talk of leaks in the media that they're going to possibly make some changes with the stamp duty and the extra levy that we have to pay as landlords. We shall see. But what we do know is that landlords are taking action and aren't lying down and just taking these tax changes in their stride. And there's a report out that in Q3, 63%, so nearly 2/3 of landlords, when they took on a mortgage, went through the limited company route. So 2/3 of landlords last quarter used limited company mortgages over traditional mortgages. Now, I don't know what the percentage was before, but it was going to be a fraction of that. So a big shift, a big change, which is really interesting. We've talked about limited companies a lot. It's right for some people, absolutely, but maybe too many people are piling in now before the dust is settled.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that statistic. I'm still slightly dubious about it because it just sounds ridiculously too high. And it does include transfers. So there's been a lot of people selling properties from themselves as individuals to their companies, which actually has tough tax consequences. But some people have been doing it nevertheless because the tax consequences are going to be worse for them of keeping it in individual ownership. So maybe that skews it very slightly, but still, even just from talking to people at meetups and things like that, so many more people. This just wasn't on the radar a couple of years ago, but so many people are now setting up limited companies. So maybe that number is right, but it's certainly a big change. And we are seeing lenders adapting to this and rates improving, criteria easing slightly, which, we've said would happen because if that's the way landlords are going, they need to lend money. We've talked about this in the past as well, and therefore it's becoming easier to do so. So it's not going to be right for everyone, but the incentives are shifting in that direction. And clearly a lot of landlords are deciding that's the way to go.
And it's not surprising that landlords are piling into limited companies when the normal buy-to-let mortgages are just hard to deal with. Going through it now compared to 12 months ago seems so much more difficult. And that's for good reason, Rob, because the Bank of England, as we say, busy week, have released notice that they are making buy-to-let lending tougher than it has been.
Yeah, I think in the short term, this is probably the biggest story of the bunch. So over the long term, the need for lots more properties and all the rest of it is going to be very important. Losing the legal challenge is a shame, but it's kind of always anticipated. But this is potentially the one where we're going to see the biggest impact over the next 12 months. This is the Bank of England who've come out with new guidance on how mortgage lenders need to underwrite their loans. And there was a lot of speculation about this before it happened. We've talked about it on the podcast in the past. And it's basically where they don't want to raise the base rate for obvious reasons, but they do want to dampen down lending, and they do want to try and de-risk things and stop people from stretching themselves too far so we don't have a repeat of what happened 8 years ago. So what they're doing instead of manipulating the base rate is trying to change the underwriting criteria and make it a little bit more expensive or a little bit tougher to get loans, so you can't borrow as much as before and therefore dampen things down a bit. There were lots of rumours flying around, mostly surrounding the stress test that gets applied in terms of rental cover. So kind of a fairly standard one is 125%. So your mortgage payments need to be at least 125% of your projected mortgage payment. There were rumours that was going to be forced up to 140 or 145%. There were also rumours that it's going to have to cover that percentage at an interest rate of something like 7.5%. That was the rumour. Thankfully, that turned out not to be the case. They haven't gone that far at all. So they're now saying that they must stress test it at 125% based on an interest rate of at least 5.5%. So actually, in terms of that, I don't think we're going to see an enormous change because most lenders knew this was coming. They don't want to have things forced on them out of the blue, so they kind of preemptively change and toughened up their own internal checks. And the document actually says that it's not a radical change to the kind of underwriting best practices that lenders have in place anyway. But there are other bits going on as well here. Possibly the most important one is to do with portfolio landlords. So their definition of a portfolio landlord is someone with 4 or more mortgaged buy-to-let properties. And what they're saying is that in the case of portfolio landlords, they should be looking at their kind of exposure across the sector as a whole. So rather than just looking at this one particular property that you're looking at buying, they should be looking at the overall picture of their debt and their obligations, their expenses and all that kind of thing. And even in the case of non-portfolio landlords, they should be trying to take into account their likely expenditure. So not just looking at the rent, so the top line, but actually looking at the bottom line and looking at all the expenses that they're likely to have, including their tax obligations. And there's a suggestion that lenders could, if they wanted, just assume that everyone is a higher rate taxpayer to make it more simple for them. So there's a lot going on here. It's hard to know exactly how it's going to pan out. But I think what we can say is it's going to make the whole process more arduous, especially in the short term, while lenders are getting used to this. So it's a staged introduction. The first date by which they need to have some of this in place is January 2017. So it's not far off. And so there's going to be some lenders who are doing a lot of this anyway. And there are going to be others who are really scrambling around, trying to get some of this through. So I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing some delays and backlogs while they get up to speed with all this. But there's a lot going on, and the policy document from the Bank of England is actually quite readable. So if you do want to go and have a look at it in full, we will be linking to it in the show notes, which again are thepropertyhub.net/busyweek.
As we mentioned earlier, it really gives people an incentive to look at other avenues such as limited companies to go down the lending route because, it's a company and it's not an individual. We'll see if they eventually apply it to limited companies. It's possible. What I would say, though, is many of these mortgage companies, as Rob touched on, are implementing these rules already. So the reason why mortgage applications feel just more painful than they did 12, 18 months ago is that they are, because a lot of the lenders actually were bringing this in already in anticipation of it happening. And in fact, some made it even harder than what's been brought out. So there was talk of rent ratios of 140%. They're actually staying at 125. So yes, it's going to be painful paperwork, and your mortgage broker will certainly earn their money and probably be a bit more stressed out. How much it'll impact on you as an individual, we'll see. It doesn't seem as bad as anticipated. We'll see. But certainly, you can see why 2/3 of landlords chose the limited company route last time. However, I will caveat with wait for the autumn statement to see if there's any big news before, planning ahead. Yes, company mortgages actually do work for some people already, even if the tax changes that were announced are removed. I actually should have been in a limited company a while ago, and the great thing about the tax changes is it actually got me to sharpen up my approach from a tax point of view. And for many contractors and business owners, it definitely is worth considering. Obviously, please do take advice. But if you're on the fence at the moment on whether to do it or not, I know this sounds like, a no-brainer to go down a limited company route, but wait a few weeks, see what the current government's going to say, what their approach and attitude to property investment is, and take it from there. But one thing this government has in common with every single government is they want to build more houses. Hooray, they want to build more houses. We'll see if they do it, but I'll leave the scepticism to the end. Let's give you the news. So the government's committed $5 billion to building 25,000 new homes by 2020. Great, $5 billion. That is a lot of money. Let's not mock it. That is a lot. What's not a lot is 25,000 more homes. Because if we remember what the target was 10 years ago, and let's face it, it's probably significantly higher now, but the target just to keep up with demand was 250,000 people. So to build an extra 25,000 homes over the next 3 years is 10% of 1 year's demand. So not that exciting. What is even less exciting, though, is that, I'm going to steal what you said before the podcast, Rob, is governments tend to talk quite big at the beginning and say they're going to do all this. But anyone remember George Osborne's Garden Cities? What happened to them?
Yeah, we've been cynical about some of these things a few times in the past. I remember doing an episode about this ages ago when Osborne was just talking about garden cities and being a bit sceptical at the time. And that scepticism has always been justified in the past. It's always popular to stand up in front of the conference and talk big talk about how you're going to solve the housing crisis. But then you actually try and do it and you figure out it's a little bit more difficult than you first thought. And there's perhaps a reason why things have got to the point they are, and it takes more political will and more unpopular decisions than you perhaps actually want to do. So we will see. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, but I'm not going to be holding my breath. But like you say, Robert, it will be interesting to see what's in the autumn statement. The big talk is that's always going to happen. There are lots of things that are going to be announced that they're going to do, which is going to sound brilliant. But let's see what actually makes it into the plan that they are going to do. So rather than speculation, what's actually going to happen, that we'll be finding out very soon.
We will. And this links back to our first news story of a dramatic undersupply of property, in terms of a dramatic undersupply of rental property. So while some of this was a bit negative, we have to remember that the basic need for more homes and more rental property exists and isn't going away. And it seems can't be solved even if you throw $5 billion at it. So the underlying reasons for why we invest in property and why the prices rise over the long term are still very much in play and don't seem to have even the remotest chance of going away soon, which I'm not saying is a good thing, but if you understand what's happening, then you can do something about it. Right, hopefully you enjoyed this episode, something different to what we've done before, but as we said, a lot going on. If you've enjoyed it, you might enjoy Property News Radio, which for those who've been with us for a while may remember, it was a weekly Property News Radio show where I'd round up the news of the week, just a short 5-10 minute snippet of what's been happening. Now, it's been dormant for a while, but it will arise from the ashes in the new year, so look out for that. It's a little bit early, but as we've done a news special, I thought I'd mention it. So keep your eyes out for that, but I'll obviously mention it nearer the time. But what I will not delay on, Rob, absolutely not, is a review.
Yeah, don't hold back on that. Don't want to be waiting until next year for some iTunes reviews. And we're going to be getting quite backed up with them, so we should probably have one of them right now.
We should. And this one comes from Sam Jones. Hi, Sam. I love the Property Podcast. As someone who's been in the lettings market for over 15 years, I'm still picking up tips and new ideas each week. The podcast is equally helpful for new investors, and I will encourage you to take the leap. The Rob's put out a wide variety of great quality free resources. Take advantage of that and build your portfolio. Thanks, Rob and Rob. Well, thank you, Sam. Great review. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Cause for celebration, you might say. And this resource of the week is one of yours, Rob. This looks quite exciting.
I think this gives a bit of an insight into my life, Rob. One of my favourite apps, Vivino. So the app is a wine app. So for those who like drinking the stuff, I've been known to have a glass or two in the evening before, you will like this app. So if you're anything like me, you go to the supermarket or wherever you buy your wine. Maybe you go to a smarter establishment than I do. You go to your supermarket, and probably this also gives an insight into my life. You look at the deals. You go, right, that was a £10 wine, now it's £6, and you buy it. Maybe that's just me. And
exactly what I do.
Okay, I'm not alone, thank you. So this app is really, really good. What you do is you open it, obviously, and then you've got a scanner, and you scan the label. And it is incredible. I've only ever had one bottle of wine it's not recognised. And believe me, I've scanned a few. And what it will do is it will tell you the review of all the other people that use the wine, the aggregate score. So anywhere from 0 to 5 stars. It is really, really useful. As a little tip, people seem to be very, very picky on their wine. I know it's can be subjective wine, but I've found that if you can find 4.0 or higher, then you've got a good bottle on your hands. So really, really good app. And best of all, it's free. So you can still buy your cheap wine, like I do, but get good quality stuff, and it's not going to cost you any more to use the app. And listen, at first you feel a bit weird as you're wandering around the supermarket scanning bottles, but the shame eases off pretty quickly, I can assure you.
I think if you're standing for ages in the supermarket or scanning things, you're going to get people like coming up to you and asking where the toilet roll is and things like that. They're going to think you work there.
Yeah, possibly.
But it sounds like it's worth getting over it, because that does sound very useful.
It is, Rob, but not as useful as next week, because next week we are bringing you the ultimate resource in property investment. What's that? Well, you better join us to find out. We will be back next Thursday morning with the Property Podcast, with the ultimate resource. We believe it's the best resource for property investors you can find. So we've got a whole episode on that. And, of course, we'll be back with Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday. So make sure you join us on Tuesday. Make sure you're back with us next Thursday morning. But until then, everyone, have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.